Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Community Capital Raising Strategies for Cooperatives. We're excited to have you join us today with Project Equity and Cutting Edge Capital. So I'm Alison Lingane, co-founder of Project Equity, and I'm joined today by Kim Arnone, Vice President of Cutting Edge Capital, and Sarah Kaplan, an attorney with Cutting Edge Counsel. So I'm going to, in just a second, frame up the discussion for today, but before I do that, I have a couple of housekeeping items. So the first is that we are recording the webinar, and all of the participants will receive an email with the link to the recorded webinar once we have it available, so stay tuned for that. And also, we encourage you to make this a conversation. So if you've got questions or thoughts that you want to be able to share, there is a way for you to type that in using the webinar panel, and so we'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the presentation, and as moderator I may jump in and pose some of the questions to the presenters. So let me just tell a little bit about who we are at Project Equity and frame up the conversation. So we're a nonprofit with a national presence, but we're based in Oakland, California, and we exist. Our mission is really to scale up this highly underrepresented but very powerful business model of worker ownership, and specifically to benefit low-wage workers and low-income communities. And so, just briefly, make sure we're all on the same page about what we're talking about. What is a worker-owned cooperative? Well, first and foremost, they are businesses, and they're businesses that are both owned and governed by and for the benefit of their workers. And so why are we so enamored? Why do we believe so strongly in this business model of worker ownership? Well, there have been many studies and data that demonstrate that employee ownership brings significant benefit, not just to the workforce, which is very important, higher than industry average pay and benefits, asset building opportunities through that business ownership, and a voice in key decisions about the business. But it also builds stronger businesses and has benefits to society more broadly. So for folks who want to dig into this more, we do have a publication on our site, Worker Co-ops Pathways to Scale, that has more information about these benefits and about ways to scale up the model. And at Project Equity, our approach to scaling this model is that our primary strategy is to support existing successful businesses to transition to worker co-ops. Co-op conversion. Or a conversion to worker ownership. So I wanted to just explain briefly how that works. So a co-op conversion at its simplest explanation, its essence, is a sale of a business. And it's a sale of a business from the existing owner to a newly formed worker co-op. And like the sale of any of things of large value, like a purchase or sale of a home or a purchase or sale of a car, this transaction is typically financed by lenders or investors. And so the role of capital in these conversions is critically important and can oftentimes really just help make this happen. And so the importance here, or the connection to community, is also critically important. So these are businesses that are often long-standing and have deep community roots, deep community connections. And this transition to employee ownership is a way to help that business stay rooted for the long term in the community. And the opportunity to involve the community through supporting that financing just helps to deepen those roots locally. And so the role of capital and financing is very important for any business that includes worker co-ops, and that financing is critical in three main parts of the life cycle. It can be the startup, if you're starting it up from scratch, or the conversion if you're transitioning an existing business to be a worker co-op, or as growth capital for those businesses. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to my colleagues at Cutting Edge Capital.
Great. This is Kim Arnone. Alison, thank you again and Project Equity for inviting us to join you in this presentation today. I know we're in the process of switching over slides. There we go. I wanted to start with just talking a little bit about the mission of Cutting Edge and then support that mission through our work. The key for us is trying to build a new economy, and the economy that we want to see is more resilient, more equitable, and more inclusive than what we find now. And we see that what we consider community capital raising options and cooperatives raising capital both through conversion or through a startup are key pillars to this new resilient economy. We work on these issues through two companies. Cutting Edge Capital is our consulting company, where we work on capital raising strategies with our clients. We work on, in particular, direct public offerings, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. We help enterprises develop investment funds, and we consult on business planning and other financial matters out of our consulting company, Cutting Edge Capital. We also have a law firm that supports our work through understanding the legal and regulatory issues and working through those on capital raising strategies. We also do typical things that a law firm would do for small businesses, including assisting with employment issues, set up as a co-op or as another type of business, or converting. So we work on all of those issues. I think we should start by talking about what is community capital and what do I mean when I say community capital. When we think about a community capital raise, we think about a business or enterprise that's raising capital in alignment with its own mission and with community goals and needs, that it is looking to make an impact in its community, and that the investment opportunity, the capital raising opportunity, is open to a broad segment of the community, meaning community capital raising isn't typically narrowed to the highest net worth individuals, but the goal is to open it broadly so the community really is investing in community-based businesses. We want these types of capital raises to be promotable so that you can reach out to your network, you can advertise and have events and discuss what you're doing with your business, as well as what the investment opportunity is. And that we can identify what the potential tangible return on investment is to those investors, but we can also identify what the intangible returns are to the community. And what we like to see is this, what we call the virtuous cycle. If a community invests in a local business, that local business thrives. It hopefully creates jobs, creates more vibrant neighborhood or local economy. It provides returns to investors. The general economy in that area thrives, and hopefully there's more community investment. This strategy keeps some investment dollars in our community rather than being extracted out of the community to Wall Street or other areas outside of what we like to see, which is building community wealth. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about community capital working for everyone. How do you know if you're ready for a community capital raise? There's basically three things that you want to be looking at in broad general terms as a business, as a co-op. You want to make sure you've got a business plan. That business plan needs to include what your mission and vision is. How are you going to connect with your community with what you're doing with your business? And then you have to be ready and have a desire to raise capital in the coming months or year, and to be building on your community network in anticipation of that capital raise. What we're going to do next is dig a little bit deeper into how cooperatives in particular can raise capital, and we're going to start with a discussion of community capital issues directed specifically to cooperatives, and then we'll branch out and talk about a few more lines after that. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Kaplan.
So in the email,
I'm Sarah Kaplan. I'm an attorney with Counsel. I'm going to talk about issues specific to cooperatives. So what is it like to raise capital if you're a cooperative? First of all, the basic definition of a cooperative is that it is owned and democratically governed by its members, and its profits are primarily shared with members on the basis of their use of the cooperative. So in a worker cooperative, using the service of the cooperative means providing work and being paid for that work. Returns on capital investment have to be secondary. If the business is to remain a cooperative, there are legal limits on returns on capital, and those legal limits come from state statute, federal statute, and federal tax law. As I said, cooperatives have to be governed by their members. With one member has one vote in general, and this means that investor voting rights have to be limited. So what a cooperative can offer to investors is really different than what a non-cooperative business can offer. If you think about many businesses might think that the way to get capital is from big investors like venture capitalists, and that's just not possible with a cooperative if the business wants to remain cooperative. So the question is, what can you offer to investors? The three general things that cooperatives can offer to investors are the membership shares. That means the share of common stock. In worker cooperatives, often each worker member buys one share of common stock, and that gives them the right to be a worker member. Preferred shares, preferred stock. When I say preferred stock, I mean it's another class of stock that has different rights. It has some preference in return, like it gets dividends before the worker members get dividends, or it might have a preference to assets on liquidation. That would be a worst case scenario, but it's a way to have investors feel like their investment is protected a little bit more than the common shareholders are. And then the last thing would be loans, also called notes or debt. So today we're talking about community capital, where you can actually reach out to the community to let them know about the fundraising. And so we're talking about, basically you could say, different ways of doing crowdfunding. So the three strategies that we came up with, these are legal strategies. I want to make sure that cooperators know that your state law probably has some exemptions that can benefit you. Take advantage of your state law exemption. And so what I mean by that is that, in general, if you're going to go out and raise money from the public where you're asking people to invest and offering a return on the investment, you can only offer that to the public if you register and get permission from your state or nationally to do that. But there are legal exemptions from that requirement, and that makes it a lot easier and cheaper for you to raise money. So most state laws have exemptions in their securities statute that allow cooperatives to sell shares of stock to the public, and that often looks like some membership stock that you would buy to join the cooperative. But all the states are different. So I just have California and Illinois here as examples because those are the states where I'm licensed and where I've looked at this. So in California, as of January 2016, so this is an exciting new update to this law, cooperatives organized under California law can raise up to $1,000 per investor. And we say up to $500,000 because once you hit the 500 investor point, you become subject to other reporting requirements that are onerous that you would want to avoid. But what this looks like is that this state law exemption this would be a way to raise up to $500,000, $1,000 from each investor. And in Illinois, illustrates the difference between state laws. In Illinois, that limit is actually $10,000 per investor, but there's no specific class of stock. Or California has a category of investor member. Illinois doesn't have that. But this is just to illustrate. Take a look at your state law. Find a local attorney who can find this for you, because state laws actually have exemptions for cooperatives that might benefit you. And then some other ways of crowdfunding that are available to all businesses are direct public offerings and Title III federal crowdfunding that Kim is going to talk about in a little bit. But first, I wanted to get into more detail on the California specific cooperative exemption, capital raising exemption that I just mentioned. So for co-ops in California, here's what that exemption looks like. When I say exemption, again, I mean that you don't have to get permission from the state to raise capital. And what the exemption is any shares or membership issued by any cooperative that is incorporated under the California Cooperative Corporation Law. There was in place co-ops were allowed to raise up to $300 per member. That was raised to $1,000. And there is a new definition of community investor member, which is an outside investor in a worker cooperative. And that type of person is almost never allowed to vote. So what this does is, so first of all, any kind of cooperative could raise money from members. Any kind of cooperative can use this exemption. And worker cooperatives now have a way to raise money from outside investors who are not workers without turning over control to those people. And I just want to read a key part of the statute. Community investor voting power in a worker cooperative shall be as provided in the articles or bylaws and is limited to approval rights only over a merger, sale of major assets, reorganization, or dissolution. Approval rights shall not include the right to propose any action. So this shows you just how limited the community investor member voting rights would be. So I hope that gave you a picture of what California cooperatives can do. And now Kim is going to talk about a broader picture of crowdfunding.
Thanks. So you'll see up on the screen is a chart that compares different capital raising strategies, and I'm going to talk through each of these basically, but and you'll see that there's also a column that compares the California co-op exemption, so you can kind of get a sense. When we compare community capital raising options, we think there are some key considerations that co-ops and other businesses should consider before deciding about how they're going to move forward. While donation or pre-sale based crowdfunding isn't a type of securities raise, we often get questions about how that fits within this, and so I've included a column, a comparison column for donation or pre-sale based crowdfunding as well. What we typically look at is how expensive is it relative to how much you want to raise? Is what regulations are involved? Is it regulated by the state level, at the federal level, or if it's exempt from regulation? Can you publicly announce your intention to raise capital and actually solicit investments publicly, as opposed to privately on one-on-one conversations? That's a key differentiation point that we'd like to discuss. Can a large segment of society invest is another consideration, meaning is it open broadly to community members, or is it only open to the highest net worth individuals? We'd like to see capital raises be open more broadly to community whenever possible. We recognize that as businesses are in different stages, that they look at different ways to capital raise, and private placements definitely have private solicitation of investment definitely has its place depending on where you are in your growth cycle. We do like community options utilized whenever possible for the reasons that we talked about before, the extra benefits that we think a community really receives when there's direct community investment. And then you also want to consider what any registration or restrictions are on where you can sell. Let's start with the pre-sale and donation-based. It's not a securities offering, and the cost can be minimal, although many of the sites like Indiegogo and Kickstarter that you use do carry some costs. There's also a cost to getting the marketing materials necessary to be on those websites, and you still have the outreach and marketing to do to bring in folks to either pre-buy a product or to donate. We've seen that some straight donation-based, not a pre-sale based, hasn't always worked for businesses, because I think that folks who are doing those type of Kickstarter and Indiegogo pages don't always understand why they would be donating to a for-profit business. So we've seen pre-sales work a little bit better than a straight donation-based. The second column, well, let me talk a little bit more about. There's no regulation on this. It's not because it's not a securities, and there's no regulation on number of investors or where your investors come from. So it's fairly easy from a regulatory standpoint. Title III crowdfunding is the option that has just started in May of 2016. It is a federal exemption from securities laws as long as you do certain sets of disclosures and you comply with the regulations and restrictions that are part of that law. It isn't actually reviewed by any regulator, but because it's not reviewed, there are restrictions on how you can reach out to community. And it's limited only to the platforms that are registered to host these types of investment opportunities. The Title III crowdfunding, from a cost perspective, typically the platforms themselves take a percentage of your raise. Again, there's marketing costs to prepare for the materials that need to go on the platform. And the biggest kind of drawback to Title III is that your advertising and your outreach to potential investors is limited only to using the platform, meaning that it's very difficult to have community events or one-on-one conversations with potential investors, because the design of the Title III crowdfunding exemption and limitation to the platform, it's designed to give every potential investor the exact same information, which then limits how you do that. So you can't have a one-on-one conversation with someone where you're answering questions about your raise, because it's not that Q&A is not available to everyone else who's potentially an investor. It's a fairly strict advertising policy, and it can hamper a business that's very community focused and those, being able to shake someone's hand or look in someone's eye. That isn't as easy to do under this, but it definitely has its advantages as well, because it's a 50-state approach. So if you have a disparate source of potential investors across many states, it can be a cost-effective way to do that. The third column is direct public offering, which is a type of investment crowdfunding, but it's not new. These laws have been on the books for, in some cases, 80 to 100 years. They're state-by-state laws, and they come out of this ability for states to regulate the investment opportunities that happen within its borders. So, for example, under a direct public offering, you have to register your securities offering, and that could be a debt instrument or an equity instrument, preferred shares, as Sarah was talking about earlier, or notes. You have to register them with the state regulatory authority, so there is some regulation, but you actually have a regulator looking at it and approving it before you can solicit investors. And some investors find some peace of mind with that. Because it's registered at the state level, it can be open to virtually anyone with investable income. So there's typically some suitability requirements for investors, but they're relatively low, and they're a lot lower than the high net worth standards that we see in private placements. Typically, you have a 500 community investor limit, primarily because having over 500 regular community investors triggers some reporting requirements to the SEC that are too onerous for small businesses to comply with. The amount you can raise varies depending on your strategy. Direct public offerings are actually kind of an umbrella of 2 or 3 different strategies at the state level. And so if you go into multiple states, typically your raise limit is $1 million, although the government is looking at raising that to $5 million. But if you stay within one state, so if you're a Bay Area business and you're looking to raise capital only from California investors, there's no limit on how much money you can try to raise under your regulatory filing with the state. And then again, we see the California co-op exemption with some comparisons. And this gives you kind of a good overview of the key things we think you ought to be comparing among the community capital raising strategies. Next slide. So we've talked about a bunch of different strategies today. This is just a little bit of a recap. Oh yeah, Alison, did you have a question?
Yeah,
sure.
Just back to the last slide. There's a couple of questions that I think would be useful.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, great. So the first would be if you could just define what an accredited investor is.
Great. So an accredited investor or a high net worth investor, it depends on if you're an individual or an entity. So for individuals, there's 2 potential tests. One is you have to have $1 million in net worth, excluding your homes, cars, and furnishings, your home, car, and furnishings, or you have to be making $200,000 a year and expect to continue making $200,000 a year, or $300,000 as a household. So 200 as an individual or 300 as a household. So there's an income test or a net worth test. For enterprises, you typically have to have $5 million in assets. So if a business or enterprise of some sort is an investor, they have to have $5 million in assets to be considered an accredited investor. And everyone else is not accredited.
That's great. That's super helpful. And then when you're talking about the Title III federal crowdfunding, that this is what came out of the Jobs Act, can you talk just a little bit more about the platforms? So if folks are interested in learning more about that, where would they go to find out what platforms exist and to learn about the differences among the platforms?
Well, the platforms have to register with an agency called FINRA, and the platforms are regulated by FINRA. I believe FINRA has a list on their website of who has been licensed to be a Title III portal. I would say that it's a little bit difficult to be able to easily compare how they work from an issuer's perspective. So from a cooperative's perspective, you'd have to talk to them individually. There's probably some information on each site, but each platform probably varies. For example, how much of a percentage they take of the raise can vary from 2% to 10%, would be my guess of the range. Each platform typically has a sweet spot for the kind of raises and kind of capital raises it's trying to attract. So understanding and reading each platform's mission will be helpful to see if it's a good fit. It's important to remind everyone that the platform really is a marketing and kind of a software platform. While they're regulated by FINRA and they have to be licensed, they don't act as attorneys for the companies that are making the offering. So they have set up templates that they provide to most folks who want to list, and it's up to those businesses to provide the disclosures that are necessary under the law and to seek their own counsel if they want some assistance with making sure that they're complying with the law. The platform itself just asks you to do the disclosures and does the filing of those disclosures. But again, there's no regulatory review, so there's no way without an outside legal counsel to know if you've done the disclosures accurately. And the platform takes on the marketing piece, but it doesn't take on the legal compliance. So it's new, and we're not really sure exactly how it's all going to work in the long run. From the perspective of how much it will cost or exactly how it will work.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. And then one additional question was, this chart is so very helpful, and you have a dollar sign indicating sort of the relative cost of the different approaches. And I'm wondering if you could share, kind of translate that into real numbers. What would be a range of what it might cost, for example, to set up and effectively, run through a direct public offering?
Yeah, it's a little bit hard. I can give some examples. So let me tell you some of the criteria that trigger the cost. So for donation-based crowdfunding, we think it's a little bit less expensive because mostly you've got marketing costs and some cost to the hosting platform, and that you have a lot more control over that as far as how much you want to spend. If you're going to spend some serious money doing a video for a Kickstarter campaign, that's going to be more. I mean, a video could be done inexpensively for $2,000, but if you're going to use it for other purposes and want it professionally done, it might be 10. So there's a wide range. And then the platform that you use also has fees, and so that would add on to that. For Title III crowdfunding, again, it depends on what their sign-up fee might be. Some are waiving their fee right now because it's new, their initial startup fee, or they have a minimal startup fee of like $1,000 to $3,000, and then they take a percentage. Typically, I've seen 5% of the total raise. So that amount. So if you're raising $1 million, then 5% is, help me out, is $50,000. You're asking a lawyer to do math in her head. Scary, which is quite expensive. So if you're very successful in raising $1 million, then on the back end you will have to have taken out $50,000 for that. In addition, they typically require a video to be used on the platform, and for you to have some developed materials for disclosure. For a direct public offering, the components are really twofold. One is the legal and regulatory component, because it's a slightly more onerous component to be registered. And the second is marketing. And that they also vary. So for a direct public offering that is $1 million or less, you can typically do that from a legal cost perspective from between $10,000 and $20,000. Then the marketing piece goes on top of that. And the reason why it varies depends on how far you are in your business plan, how much can be translated very easily into the disclosure document you need for the regulatory approval process. And by the way, the same kinds of disclosures are used for the Title III. It's just that there's a component of review at the state level for a direct public offering. If you're doing a very large fund, for example, a $10,000 real estate fund that uses a direct public offering mechanism, the costs are a lot higher, typically 3 times that, because additional regulations and additional disclosures, additional legal work. So that's why the range is kind of so wide. It depends really on the situation. I think that we've had some folks go through what we call our direct public offering lab that allows a lot of the work to be done by the organization and less attorney work. We can keep it on the lower end, closer to the $15,000 level for regulatory review. And then the question becomes is how do you market it? So with a direct public offering, you have a lot more options. You can bring in your partners to help you host events. You can take on community leaders who can help do matching grants for raising, and depending on your marketing strategy will depend on how much money you spend. If you're a business that's at a point that needs to brand, you can brand your business and work on an offering campaign at the same time. That might increase your marketing costs for your GPO, but you might be actually getting double the bang for your dollar because you can market both at the same time through events and through social media and websites. So I hope that helps a little bit. And then Sarah has, yes, I'm going to have Sarah talk about, we've been trying to reduce the cost as much as we can for co-op, for the co-op exemption, and we've put together a package that we are offering to co-ops to comply with the new California law.
Terrific. Yes,
so,
thanks. Continue.
Yes, for the California co-op exemption, for a California co-op raising up to $1,000 per investor from only California residents, there's no registration at the state level, and you don't have to use the portal. So that's why the costs are smaller. So what the cost of doing this would be for is just preparing the documents that you need to raise money from people. And those are a disclosure document. Basically, it's not a good idea to raise capital from investors without having a disclosure document, because this is your record of what you have told your investors. And if you don't have a record of what you've told investors, there's really a potential for fighting about that later. So we always recommend having some offering memorandum or disclosure document, and then you need an agreement for investors to sign. And also maybe to create the preferred shares that you might want to offer, you'll have to amend your document. So there's some legal costs that just have to do with how do you actually raise money from people, but no registration required. And we have a package price that is a lower dollar amount than the other amounts that Kim just mentioned, and we'd be happy to talk to anybody about that.
Yeah, and to some extent, it depends on how much work needs to be done on the articles and bylaws to prepare your business to accept investment members. So if the business is already set up to do that, then the cost to do the offering and get the other legal documents in place would be lower. So it's a little bit of a. Alison, I hope that answers your.
Yeah, that's
question.
Great. That's terrific. Please continue on.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to wrap this up again. We've talked about a lot of different strategies. So the specialized co-op strategies that are under each state law. So today we didn't talk a lot about a lot of different state laws, but there are some that just allow that memberships are not considered securities. There's a little more leeway in how you raise capital, but we looked specifically, because we thought there might be a few more folks from California on this call, at the California exemption. We're seeing similar types of exemptions in other states that we can always take a look at with you. Again, the direct public offering is a way to do investment crowdfunding. So you're offering, typically, a co-op is typically offering preferred shares or notes in a direct public offering. And again, it's registered and has more liberal advertising and solicitation rules. We talked about the Federal Jobs Act Title III as a recap, the brand new federal approach to crowdfunding. It has some great pieces to it and some drawbacks. The drawbacks being kind of limited to the platform. And there are some per investor limitations that go along with the Jobs Act as well. Pre-sale and donation-based crowdfunding is something that we see a lot of startups consider kind of as a way to kind of bring in some friends and family dollars that aren't a securities offering. And the one that we didn't touch on that much is private placements. Private placements is a very broad term that can encompass any kind of investment, from a true investment by friends and family from people you know very well. And it also means any of those private investments that come from angels or VC. So it's the same type of regulatory mechanism that Silicon Valley firms use. But the laws can be used for small businesses as well. Typically, you want to have some documentation of the money coming in and what rights and privileges are attached to it, whether it's equity or debt. we work with folks on documenting that and as cost effectively as possible to bring some dollars into sort of organizations as they're getting started or as they're moving through a growth phase. But those are the typical, and even those small friends and family type private investments, we consider them community capital when they're utilized in that way. Typically, a private placement can take in from 10 to 35 community investors, non-high net worth or non-accredited investors, and then at the same time also take in accredited investors. So if you have your rich uncle who is an accredited investor and wants to invest, they can come in and invest as well. So those were some of the strategies as an overview that we talked about today.
So I'm going to jump in, Kim.
Yeah, go ahead.
Kim, I'm again with a couple of additional questions that we've got from our listeners. I'm going to share two questions sort of related. So the first one is about the Title III crowdfunding. And you said that you can't advertise your offering outside of the platform you're using, but the question is, can you advertise that you have an offering on an online platform? And if you can, what are the restrictions around specifically what you can say? And then related is, can you raise capital using more than one of these? So could you raise capital using the California Co-op exemption and the Title III crowdfunding at the same time?
Yeah, those are good questions. So what you can do as far as advertising, so let's say your business has a website and you're doing a Title III crowdfund raise on a platform, you can say that on your website and link to the platform. The offering terms have to be provided you can provide the very minimum of offering terms, but the meat of the offer and all of the agreements and the description of the full description of your offering are all hosted on the platform. So there's very little that you can put on your own website. Everything else goes to the platform. And on the platform, it's very open. Typically the platforms can be searched by search terms, or you can look at different types of companies. Sometimes a platform might categorize if you're looking for a particular category of investment. And then the second is a good question. Title III won't be integrated with other types of offerings. So that means you can do simultaneous offerings. While they're not automatically integrated, different types of offerings have different rules around advertising. So it gets complicated. So without knowing this very specific types of offerings that you're doing simultaneously, you would want to think about how you advertise, because you don't want someone to have seen advertising, for example, that you can do under a DPO that's very broad and provides a lot of information, and then that may or may not be exactly included on the Title III platform, and then that person actually ends up investing in the Title III offering instead. You may have inadvertently, the two aren't exclusive, but you may have broken the rules on Title III about providing advertising information outside of the platform. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I think the question mentioned the California community investor member exemption. So that rule does not prohibit advertising. So you could have the federal crowdfunding going on and advertise that, and if a California investor sees it, that's completely fine, because the California investor could invest either in the federal crowdfunding or I think the rules, you would still have to look at each rule, because there's a limit. One thing to look at is the advertising, as Kim was saying, and also per investor limit. So California investors could invest up to $1,000 per person with the co-op exemption, and the limit under the federal crowdfunding would probably be a little bit higher. Yeah. So it might, in that case, it might make more sense to do them separately or to just do the federal. We would have to look at the situation.
I guess the upshot is that any securities offering is complicated, and there are a lot of rules. So while the general rule is you can do a Title III while you're doing other types of raises like the California Cooperative exemption, you just want to consult to make sure that your marketing plans and other issues around those capital raising have been thought through completely so that you don't inadvertently break a rule with one or the other that you're doing simultaneously.
That's great. Thanks.
Sure. We put together a little to-do list. If you're a co-op and you're asking yourself, well, what are the things that I need to think through, and what would be the steps? I'm going to let Sarah take over the checklist.
Yeah, I just wanted to give people a picture of what the process looks like, because maybe you haven't done this before. But we would want to know, how much are you raising? That could be a range. What's the minimum? Choose a regulatory strategy. What's your legal strategy? And that's where we map out who, how much, where, important questions like that. Define your investor base. That's kind of part of the regulatory strategy. But who are your target investors going to be? Define investor rights. This is like, what are you offering? What will the person get? What will they be able to vote on? What will their dividend be? You know, as the person, as the business offering an investment, you get to make this up, and a lot of people don't know that. And then the process of raising money, also, you'll have to probably amend articles of incorporation if you're a corporation, and amend your operating agreement policy or your bylaws for a corporation. We have to make sure your important documents actually allow you to offer what you're planning to offer. Then create the offering memorandum, that is the disclosure document that I was talking about, and have a subscription agreement, which is the contract for investors to sign. Then you're ready to raise capital. So now Kim is going to give you some exciting examples.
Yeah, we thought that it would be good to give some real examples of how these types of things have been used. Our two examples both utilize direct public offerings, meaning that they did an offering memorandum and registered in the state. So the first is Real Pickles, and Real Pickles was a cutting-edge capital client, and they're very well known in the cooperative community. They were very prepared for their conversion. They were a sole proprietorship prior to their direct public offering, and they had a core group of folks who they wanted to transfer ownership to the workers at that point. And then they were trying to figure out, well, how do we buy out the original owners and all become owners, and including the original owners. They wanted to also stay on as worker owners. So they converted from a sole proprietorship to a Massachusetts worker cooperative. And what they did to raise capital was they offered non-voting preferred stock in the new cooperative. They raised $500,000 from their community, and that was Massachusetts and Vermont. So they had enough connections outside of their community in Massachusetts to feel that it was worth registering in a second state. So they spent a little bit of additional time and money to register in that second state. That cost-benefit analysis for them was important. And so they registered in the second state. And they really worked very hard to develop their community relationships. They had a great brand. They had a great business plan. They were ready for this raise, and they raised all of their money in 2 months. So typically you have a year to raise your capital once you're given a permit to offer your capital, or to offer your investment to folks, and they completed it very quickly. They essentially had folks who were ready and excited about their product and their brand. So they're definitely a winning strategy, and they did a lot of work on the front end, so I'm going to emphasize that. And they were very well prepared from a business perspective, and they had very strong support both in the cooperative community and in their local community there in western Massachusetts. Another good example that's a little bit of a contrast to Real Pickles. Real Pickles was an existing company with a great brand and been operating for a while. So we often get the question, can you use community capital like a direct public offering to fund a startup? So this wasn't a conversion. This company didn't exist. So Zero is an idea for a startup company in the Boston area. Massachusetts had just passed a new law that required composting of food scraps for businesses using, X amount of food scraps per day or per week. And it really was an opportunity for new startup businesses to capture a new market. These businesses now had to contract to have their food scraps picked up. And so the folks at Zero, a small group of folks, very diverse group, primarily African American and Latino, wanted to create green-collar jobs. They wanted to create equity for themselves and their community, and they wanted really to have green to be part of the green economy. And so they took kind of a community organizing approach, and they actually did a number of the capital raising strategies that are available for cooperatives. The first thing they did was an Indiegogo campaign and raise some donations to start their branding process, so start marketing, and to start some of their legal costs to get ready for a direct public offering. They also had the support of cooperative funds that provided grants, and also got in line to provide loans once they raised equity. And so they raised equity using a direct public offering. They also offered preferred stock, non-voting, and they raised over $340,000 in their direct public offering, and then leveraged that for a number of different loans. They had a lot of great, connection to their community, and they were able to show really the impact they could make in creating good new jobs and also creating equity for their worker owners. And I think that was key in their marketing campaign for investment. And their preferred stock actually doesn't guarantee any dividends. They have targets that they want to hit after they have come out of the startup phase in years like 3 and beyond, but they didn't actually guarantee any particular annual return on investment to their investors. So they're sort of unique in that way. People were just believing in them and going to be patient for the return on their investment. And again, I want to emphasize that they were a great study in how to use the capital stack. So community investment strategy is just a part of how you can link together capital from the owner's own investment to a public community capital raise, to alternative lending, to commercial lending and equipment lending. There were all different things that can be utilized in order to get a business either from startup or through a growth phase. And we're ready for some Q&A. If Alison, you want to see if there's anything else that
Great.
we can address.
Yeah, let's just open this up to if you do have additional questions, or if you've typed something in that hasn't been answered, if you could note again any questions that you'd like to pose to our presenters. So maybe while we're waiting to see if there are any additional questions, Kim or Sarah, you could talk a little bit about if folks are interested in really seriously looking at this option. Can you share a little bit about some of the next steps that they could take to leverage your guys' experience?
Yeah, absolutely. We always offer a free consultation to folks who want to sort of explore some options and to sort of get a sense of what next steps might be. And so I'm not sure if the links go through, but if you go to our website at cuttingedgecapital.com, there's a way to sign up for a consultation. We just ask you to fill out a little bit of information about your business, and then we'll get back to you and find an hour we can be on the phone or in person to talk through those options. I think that just as a reminder, key things that you're going to need no matter what avenue you choose to raise capital is a well thought through business plan, whether that's in writing or not, but really thinking through it. The more you can get on paper, the better. And to have your organization's documents in good shape. So a lot of times entities start as a sole proprietor, and kind of as they grow, they try to figure out, well, what entity should I be? We can always help with that discussion as well, but you do want to keep in mind that any type of capital raise that you do is going to require that your corporate documents be in order. So those are key things to kind of keep in mind too. You don't need to, of course, have those all together, have a consultation with us, but it's just a good reminder depending on where you are in your business cycle.
Yeah, this is Sarah. I would just add, if you're trying to figure out who can I raise money from, what would be the upper limit? What we want you to figure out, how much money do you need to run your business? But if you want to know what am I allowed to do under securities law, I think talking to us would be pretty helpful. We can help you figure out what can you offer, what are your choices, who can you raise money from. Don't waste time trying to figure that out on your own.
Okay. Well, this has been just really incredibly informative, and I really wanted to thank Kim and Sarah for joining us today and for helping us understand some of the options for going to your community and getting them more involved in your business, in your worker-owned business, whether you're starting it up, whether you're growing it, or whether you're transitioning from an existing business to a worker-owned business. There are lots of ways to involve your local community, and helping them help you with the capital side of things is a really valuable way to do that. So as a reminder, we will be posting this recording as well as the slides on our website, and we'll send out an email to everyone who registered with that information. So thank you again for everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.